It's muster time near Coonamble on the central western plains of New South Wales. They're moving steers for a feedlot operation which turns over up to 35,000 head of prime Angus cattle for export every year. This enterprise produces the equivalent of 100,000 individual servings of beef every day.
If we don't have water...
And key to the entire operation is water.
Overall, it's all about the Great Artesian Basin. Without this water, our business cannot exist. We can't operate without it, and that was proven in the drought. We had 3 years of drought where this place still went at full capacity.
David Chadwick represents an action group of farmers from all over the state's northwest who believe coal seam gas extraction could cost them their clean, abundant groundwater. Water is also the lifeblood of the irrigation industry, and access to groundwater drought-proofs the region.
Basically, without the groundwater, we'd be strictly on a dry land operation and probably struggling more than we should be.
Paul Lehman runs Yarrul near Weewar. In a good year, its fertile black soils produce up to 20,000 bales of cotton and 7,000 tonnes of grain, as well as beef for the supermarket trade.
The water that's in there now is underground water.
Yarrul was developed by his grandfather, Vic Melbourne, who bought the property in 1950 and sunk 3 commercial bores like the one which fills this lagoon. He reckons coal seam gas is the biggest threat to agriculture in his 87-year lifetime.
There hasn't been enough research done. They're not really sure what they're saying, and only got to look at the results of some of the operations up in Queensland.
The Australian energy company Santos is seeking approval for a gas field of 850 wells. Most would be in the Pilliga State Forest near Narrabri, but some would be on farms like this one owned by Peter Gett. He gets paid $30,000 a year by Santos and will earn another $1,500 for every well developed on his farm.
It's not mega bucks or anything by no means, and it's not a real big part of my income either. But in the last 2 or 3 years with this drought, it's definitely been substantial to help me a bit, yeah.
Santos has 3 test wells on his farm's worst performing paddocks. They're tapping into a coal seam hundreds of metres below the aquifer supplying his stock and domestic bores, and they're separated by a rock formation known as an aquitard. For the past 13 years, his groundwater supply has been closely monitored.
There's been no change in our water pressure, and no change in our quality, and no change in the depth of our water.
Welcome to the public hearing for the Narrabri Gas Project.
The Independent Planning Commission, or IPC, will make a final decision in the coming weeks after a near 4-year state approvals process. It recently conducted an online public hearing, taking submissions from more than 400 people. It follows a record of almost 23,000 submissions to the Environmental Impact Assessment, with 98% against the project. 80% of the objections were form letters from groups such as the Lock the Gate Alliance. Even with COVID-19 restrictions, Lock the Gate still made its presence felt at the IPC's live link in Narrabri.
Santos's big plan for this region originally was 7 gas fields from Dubbo to Murrurundi to Moree, and people know that, and so they are coming together over this gas field because they love the Pilliga and value groundwater, but also because as a region they're rejecting the sort of industrial vision that Santos is offering.
Okay, thank you, Chairman and Commissioners, for the opportunity to appear before you today.
Santos Chief Executive Officer Kevin Gallagher was keen for the Commissioners to see the value of what he calls a low-cost, safe and sustainable gas project.
The Narrabri Gas Project could provide up to 1,300 jobs during construction, up to 200 local, direct and indirect jobs during operations, approximately $1.2 billion in royalties to the state of New South Wales to help fund essential government services such as health, transport and education, and a community benefit fund up to $120 million for the benefit of local community groups.
With a global gas glut, questions were raised in the inquiry about the Australian company's ability to deliver on those numbers, and also the federal government's plans for a gas-fired COVID-19 economic recovery.
This idea of a gas-fired recovery that the government keeps telling us about simply isn't happening. The private investment is fleeing gas. It's leaving gas. There's $11 billion worth of assets currently for sale in Australia. And not only that, but companies aren't spending money on exploration. They're not spending money on new projects. There is no money going into gas.
Santos says Narrabri will put downward pressure on gas prices. It already generates enough electricity from this gas-fired plant near Narrabri to power 23,000 homes. At full production, the project could provide half of the New South Wales gas demand. The Department of Planning, Infrastructure and the Environment says the project may not deliver cheap gas, but it will bring energy security to a state that now imports 95% of its natural gas and will retire its coal-fired power generators in the next 20 years. Water remains the key issue for the Narrabri project. How it will dispose of salt in the water drained from its wells is yet to be decided. It's unknown whether depressurising the deep underground coal seams will adversely impact shallower aquifers used for irrigation and stock and domestic supply. The project's environmental impact assessment found there would be only minimal and manageable risks to the environment.
The current analysis doesn't deal with any fractures or faults in the rock structures, and we know they do exist and they will make a difference.
Hydrologist John Williams is one of Australia's most respected scientists. He was a founding member of the Wentworth Group of Concerned Scientists, a former head of CSIRO's Land and Water Division and a New South Wales Natural Resources Commissioner. Based on the company's own environmental assessment, he believes the Narrabri project poses an unacceptable risk.
There are many things where the report's quite honest and says, we don't know, but we'll proceed and hope it works out. That's not good enough.
An independent panel of water experts admitted there were still uncertainties about the geology and hydrogeology of the gas field, but these could be managed with robust monitoring and regulation.
None of our assessment has identified any potential significant or irreversible harm that would result from the project, and in our view, the project does not trigger the precautionary principle.
Australia's new inland rail line between Brisbane and Melbourne will pass through Narrabri, and last year the Shire Council bought 240 hectares of land here to create an inland port, an investment hub. It's hoping gas can attract new value-added industries such as a proposed $2 billion fertiliser project and Australia's first ever bicarbonate soda business using salt from the gas project's wastewater. The Narrabri Shire is supporting the project, and while it's hoping for a jobs and investment boom, it still has some concerns.
We would like to see continuing monitoring of the gas wells, and particularly the abandoned gas wells, and we would like to see a safety net which is made up of assurances and bonds for the protection of our community.
The council believes Santos has earned a social licence and local support for the company is building.
I think you will find the divisiveness comes from outside our region.
I'm a Narrabri business owner and I support Santos.
We're Narrabri locals and we support Santos.
Narrabri Business Chamber supports Santos.
Local supporters produced this television commercial to counter what they say is a noisy opposition campaign.
I'm a Narrabri farmer and I support Santos.
If the anti-coal seam gas industry win on this one, who is going to be their next victims? Where do they go next? They'll be looking for, we believe they'll be looking for a cause, and we're concerned about who that might be. Let's hope it isn't our agriculture and irrigation industry. Let's hope it isn't them.
Do you accept that there still is some risk to the water that those farmers need?
No, I don't accept that. The science says that that the risk is, at best, is minimal. And the chief scientist has already said that this industry can safely coexist with existing farming and other existing industries. We're happy with that.
At Bibble Windy, a poor quality pond liner has been blamed for elevated levels of uranium and heavy metals detected in nearby groundwater.
In 2014, Santos was also dealing with a contamination spill caused a year earlier by the project's previous owners, Eastern Star Gas, which led to a review of the coal seam gas industry by the state's chief scientist and engineer.
We're beginning to understand, as with most engineering things, we develop layers of risk and regulation and responsiveness, but you still have accidents.
As part of her review of the coal seam gas industry, the chief scientist and engineer made 16 recommendations covering matters such as fairness, transparency, regulation and risk management. Now, 6 years on, they're yet to be fully implemented.
You suggested in those comments that basically the inquiry is wrong, you've implemented all bar 2 of the recommendations. Is that your view?
No, I'm not going to have you put words in.
OK, then I won't.
This year, a New South Wales Upper House parliamentary inquiry found only 2 of the recommendations were fully implemented.
And I think that really does raise some questions about how key issues like insurance for farmers, the cumulative risks, particularly to water in this region, but also how the government's going to be informed about the changing science around this industry. It was supposed to implement a standing advisory body, just hasn't done that.
In Queensland's Surat Basin, 122 bores have been affected by the coal seam gas industry and are subject to make good orders. According to the Office of Groundwater, there are 571 Queensland bores likely to be affected long term. In the heart of the Pilliga gas field, Tony Pickard claims 2 of his 3 groundwater bores have been contaminated by nearby Santos appraisal wells.
Here, coming out of the old well.
He spent $70,000 on independent water testing and took his case to the Land and Environment Court. Santos has denied liability and the case has stalled.
We got a bill from Ashurst, which is Santos's lawyers, for over $125,000, which we refused to pay.
Now he and his wife Carol are using rainwater for their domestic supply, and their future is uncertain.
The emotional toll is horrendous. Yeah, it really is horrendous, and it's not only on me, it's also on my wife. And we just lost our lifestyle, full stop. I mean, as soon as this happened, everything that we had planned for the future just died.
Australia's largest insurance company, the Insurance Australia Group, says it will no longer cover farmers for public liability if they have CSG infrastructure on their property. Santos says it's working towards a solution with peak farming and insurance bodies. The company now says it's good to go, and it will abide by any conditions imposed by New South Wales planning authorities.
Santos is confident that we have relied upon the best science to confirm that the Narrabri gas project can be developed safely and sustainably, without harm to water resources, human health or the environment.
Ready?
As Peter Gett awaits the Independent Planning Commission's verdict, he maintains absolute faith in the company and state regulators to get things right.
And I think Santos, they've been an Australian company as they are. I think they will do the best they can because the government will be watching over their shoulders to make sure they do this thing right.